What would you do if you saw someone mistreating a child, knowing you could lose everything by getting involved? Would your protective instincts override your need for safety? Comment below and let me know what state you're watching from, because this story takes place in a world where one moment of courage can change everything. The 80-year-old girl's tears are falling onto the marble floor of Marcello's, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, and Sophia Reeves knows she's about to make a decision that could cost her the job she desperately needs. 3 hours earlier, Sophia had tied her dark brown hair back in the neat bun that restaurant policy required, checked her reflection in the staff bathroom mirror, and reminded herself that she could do this. 26 years old and still waiting tables because her art degree hadn't opened the doors she'd hoped it would. But she was good at this job. She connected with people, remembered their preferences, made them feel welcome. Even if her manager Bradley Morrison saw her as nothing more than disposable labor, the customers appreciated her genuine warmth. She'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes that ranged from decent to nightmarish, learning early that adults couldn't always be trusted to protect children. That experience had given her an antenna for when someone was in trouble, especially kids. It was why she'd chosen to work at Marcello's despite the demanding clientele and Bradley's management style that bordered on harassment. The tips were good enough to keep her tiny studio apartment and maybe, eventually, save enough to pursue her art seriously. The dinner rush had been typically intense, wealthy Manhattan residents expecting perfection with every course. When the little girl had walked in alone, Sophia had noticed her immediately, not just because children rarely came to Marcello's, but because something about the girl's posture screamed distress. She was beautiful, with olive-toned skin and dark curls that suggested Mediterranean heritage, wearing an expensive navy blue dress that was wrinkled as if she'd been wearing it too long. Her brown eyes were wide with an anxiety that no 80-year-old should carry. The girl had approached the hostess stand with the careful politeness of a child who'd been taught proper manners but was too upset to fully execute them. "I'm looking for my daddy," she'd said in a voice that wavered despite her obvious effort to sound grown-up. "He was supposed to meet me here." Sophia had been clearing a nearby table and heard the exchange. The hostess, following protocol, had explained that unaccompanied minors couldn't be seated without an adult. The girl had nodded solemnly, then asked if she could please wait inside because she was hungry and scared to wait on the street. That's when Bradley had emerged from the kitchen, his permanent scowl deepening when he saw the situation. His thin face, always pinched with irritation, had turned almost cruel as he assessed the child. "This isn't a daycare," he'd announced loudly enough that several diners looked over. "If your father isn't here, you need to leave." The girl's face had crumpled slightly, but she'd maintained her composure with a strength that broke Sophia's heart. "Please," she'd said quietly, "I don't have anywhere else to go." Bradley's response had been swift and harsh. "That's not our problem. You're disrupting our diners. I'm calling security to escort you out." Sophia had felt something ignite in her chest, a familiar protective fury that overrode every practical consideration. She'd seen this dynamic too many times in her own childhood, adults wielding their power over vulnerable children simply because they could. Before she could stop herself, she was moving toward the hostess stand, her tray forgotten on the table behind her. "Excuse me," she'd said, her voice carrying clearly across the entrance area. "I'll take responsibility for her." Bradley had turned his cold gray eyes on her, and she'd seen the calculation there. Sophia knew she was his least favorite waitress, partly because she didn't laugh at his inappropriate jokes, and partly because she occasionally pushed back when he treated customers or staff unfairly. He'd been looking for an excuse to fire her, and she'd just handed him one. "You'll take responsibility," he'd repeated, his tone mocking. "With what authority?" "With human decency," Sophia had replied, immediately regretting the edge in her voice but unable to back down with the child watching. "She's a little girl who needs help. I'll cover her meal from my tips, and she can sit at table 12 until her father arrives." Bradley's smile had been nasty. "Table 12 is reserved for paying customers, not strays you've decided to adopt. If you want to play social worker, you can do it somewhere else. You're fired." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Sophia felt her stomach drop, her mind immediately calculating how many days she could survive without this job. But then she looked at the little girl. The child was staring up at her with a mixture of hope and terror, clearly understanding that this woman was fighting for her, but might lose because of it. "Fine," Sophia had said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I'm not leaving her alone." She'd knelt down to the child's level, her voice gentle despite the anger coursing through her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Isabella," the girl had whispered. "Isabella Torino." "Hi, Isabella. I'm Sophia. Why don't we go sit down and get you something to eat while we wait for your daddy?" She'd guided Isabella to a corner booth, ignoring Bradley's furious protests about policy violations. Using her own money, she'd ordered Isabella a grilled cheese sandwich and chocolate milk, foods that seemed appropriate for a scared 80-year-old despite Marcello's upscale menu. While they waited for the food, Isabella had gradually opened up, explaining that her daddy had been in an important meeting that ran late, and she'd taken a taxi from school because she was supposed to meet him for dinner. The trust in Isabella's eyes as she ate, the way she'd unconsciously moved closer to Sophia in the booth, the gradual relaxation of her small shoulders, all of it reinforced that Sophia had made the right choice even if it cost her everything. She'd been so focused on Isabella that she'd barely noticed the man approaching their table until his shadow fell across them. Looking up, she'd felt her breath catch. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair perfectly styled despite whatever urgent meeting had kept him late. His olive skin and strong jawline echoed Isabella's features, clearly her father, but it was his eyes that made Sophia's pulse quicken. They were dark green with flecks of gold, intense and intelligent, currently focused on his daughter with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Isabella," he'd said, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested Italian heritage. "There you are, piccola mia." "Daddy!" Isabella had launched herself from the booth into his arms, and Sophia had watched this powerful-looking man melt completely as he held his daughter. His expensive charcoal suit, the confident way he carried himself, the subtle authority in his posture, all of it disappeared as he became simply a father reunited with his child. "I'm so sorry I was late," he'd murmured into Isabella's hair. "The meeting, it couldn't be avoided. But I should have been here for you." "It's okay," Isabella had said, then turned to gesture toward Sophia. "This nice lady helped me. She bought me dinner and stayed with me when the mean man wanted me to leave." The man's attention had shifted to Sophia then, and she'd felt the full force of his focus like a physical thing. His assessment had been thorough but not insulting, taking in her waitress uniform, her defensive posture, the protective way she'd positioned herself near Isabella even while he was there. "Thank you," he'd said simply, but there had been layers of meaning in those two words that made Sophia's cheeks warm. "Anyone would have done the same," she'd replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Most people would have looked the other way, followed policy, avoided trouble. "Not anyone," he'd said quietly. "You put yourself at risk for a child you didn't know. That says something about who you are." Before Sophia could respond, Bradley had appeared beside their table, his face flushed with anger and something that might have been nervousness. He'd clearly recognized that Isabella's father was someone important, someone whose complaint could cause problems for the restaurant. "Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience," Bradley had begun, his voice obsequious in a way that made Sophia's skin crawl. "This employee violated our policies by seating your daughter without authorization. I want you to know that she's been terminated and—" The man's attention had shifted to Bradley, and Sophia had seen something dangerous flicker in those green-gold eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was perfectly controlled but carried an undertone that made even Bradley step back. "This employee," he'd said, the word carrying slight emphasis, "protected my daughter when your establishment failed to do so. She showed her kindness when you showed her cruelty. I'm curious why you think I would see her termination as appropriate rather than grounds for complaint against your management." Bradley had paled, clearly recognizing that he'd misread the situation entirely. "Sir, the policy clearly states, your policy nearly left an 80-year-old child on the street alone because of your scheduling failure," the man had interrupted. "I think we can safely say your policies need revision." He'd turned back to Sophia, his expression softening. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Dante Torino, Isabella's father. And you are? Sophia Reeves, she'd managed, still processing the rapid shift in dynamics. Former waitress at Marcello's, apparently. Dante had smiled then. A real smile that transformed his entire face and made her understand why Isabella had inherited such beautiful features. Former waitress, perhaps. But I think we can find you a better position than that. Isabella clearly thinks highly of you, and my daughter has excellent judgment about people. The way he'd said it, with that slight accent and complete confidence, had made Sophia feel like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. There had been something in his eyes beyond gratitude, a recognition that felt both thrilling and dangerous. She'd found herself thinking that this man was trouble, the kind of trouble that came wrapped in expensive suits and spoke in low voices that made promises she wasn't sure she was ready to understand. But as Isabella had slipped her small hand into Sophia's, looking up at her with complete trust and hope, Sophia had realized that ready or not, her life had just taken a turn she never could have anticipated. The scared little girl she'd protected was about to protect her in return, in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. Sophia was nursing her third cup of coffee in her studio apartment the next morning, staring at the stack of bills on her tiny kitchen table and trying not to calculate how many days she could survive without employment, when the knock came at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and her building's security was virtually non-existent, which made her pause before checking the peephole. Dante Torino stood in her hallway, looking impossibly elegant even in casual clothes, dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Isabella bounced beside him, her face lighting up when she spotted Sophia through the glass. Sophia opened the door with a mixture of surprise and wariness, immediately conscious of her worn pajama pants and oversized college sweatshirt. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough from sleep. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," Isabella announced before her father could respond. "Daddy says he has a surprise for you." Dante's smile held a hint of apology for the early intrusion. "I hope you don't mind us dropping by. Isabella was quite insistent that we speak with you as soon as possible. May we come in?" Sophia stepped back, acutely aware of her cramped living space as they entered. The studio apartment, which had felt cozy when she'd first rented it, now seemed microscopic with Dante's presence filling it. He didn't seem to judge the modest furnishings or the obvious financial constraints they represented, instead looking around with what appeared to be genuine interest. "You have good light in here," he observed, nodding toward the easel near the window where several of her paintings were displayed. "You're an artist." "I try to be," Sophia replied, self-conscious about her work being scrutinized. "The painting thing doesn't exactly pay the bills, hence the waitressing job I just lost." "About that," Dante said, his tone becoming more serious, "I have a proposition for you." Sophia felt her defenses rise automatically. Her experience with wealthy men making propositions to financially struggling women rarely involved anything she was interested in hearing. "I'm listening," she said carefully. "Isabella needs a companion," Dante explained, his attention focused entirely on Sophia's face as if reading her concerns. "Someone to help with her after-school activities, assist with homework, occasionally accompany her to events when my schedule doesn't permit it. The position would be part-time but well compensated." "Like a nanny?" Sophia asked, glancing at Isabella, who was examining her paintings with the serious concentration of a child who'd inherited her father's intensity. "More like a tutor and friend combined," Dante replied. "Isabella is in advanced classes at school, but she's been struggling with some social adjustments lately. Her mother and I divorced 2 years ago, and the transition has been challenging for her." There was something in the way he mentioned Isabella's mother, a carefully controlled neutrality that suggested complications beneath the surface. Sophia found herself studying his expression, trying to read the story he wasn't telling. "I loved having dinner with you yesterday," Isabella said suddenly, abandoning her examination of the artwork to focus on Sophia. "You made me feel safe when I was scared. Daddy says you're very brave." Sophia felt her heart tug at the sincerity in Isabella's voice. The little girl had clearly inherited her father's ability to cut straight to emotional truth. "I just did what anyone should do," she said gently. But most people don't, Isabella replied with wisdom that seemed far beyond her 8 years. That's why you're special. The comment hung in the air, and Sophia felt Dante's attention sharpen on her reaction. She was beginning to understand that this job offer wasn't entirely about Isabella's needs, though she couldn't quite identify what other motivation might be driving it. What would this position involve exactly? She asked, trying to focus on practical considerations rather than the way Dante's presence made her pulse quicken. School pickup 3 days a week, homework assistance, occasional weekend activities. Dante replied smoothly. The compensation would be $1,500 a week. Sophia's coffee cup clattered against the table as she set it down too quickly. $1,500 was more than she'd made in a month at Marcello's. That's very generous, she managed, her voice slightly hoarse. It's appropriate for the level of responsibility, Dante said simply. Isabella's safety and well-being are my priority, and I believe you understand that priority. There was something in his tone, a weight to the word safety that suggested layers she didn't fully comprehend. But looking at Isabella, who was watching this conversation with the kind of hopeful attention that suggested her opinion of the outcome mattered deeply to her, Sophia found her practical objections dissolving. I'd like to accept, she said quietly. When would you want me to start? Today, Isabella said immediately, causing both adults to smile. If you want to, we could go to the park and then you could see our apartment and maybe stay for dinner. Sophia looked to Dante for confirmation, and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something between gratitude and anticipation, as if her answer mattered more than a simple employment decision should. If you're comfortable with it, he said. Isabella has been looking forward to spending time with you since yesterday. An hour later, Sophia found herself in the back of a black sedan with tinted windows, Isabella chattering excitedly beside her while Dante sat in the front passenger seat, speaking quietly with the driver in what sounded like Italian. The car was luxurious in a way that made her previous concerns about Dante's wealth feel naive. This wasn't just comfortable money, this was serious wealth, the kind that came with drivers and security considerations she was only beginning to notice. The building they pulled up to confirmed her assessment. Dante's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower that offered panoramic views of Manhattan. Isabella gave her an enthusiastic tour, proudly showing off her bedroom with its princess castle bed and walls lined with books, her playroom filled with educational toys and art supplies, and the kitchen that looked like something from a cooking show. This is where Rosa teaches me to make pasta, Isabella explained, pointing to a marble counter that was larger than Sophia's entire kitchen. Rosa is our housekeeper, but she's visiting her family in Sicily this week. That's why Daddy has been doing all the cooking. You cook? Sophia asked Dante, who was leaning against the doorframe watching his daughter's enthusiastic presentation. I manage, he replied with a slight smile. Isabella hasn't starved yet. He makes the best scrambled eggs, Isabella declared loyally. And he always makes them into heart shapes for me. The image of this imposing man carefully shaping eggs into hearts for his daughter did something strange to Sophia's chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. This was a man who loved his child completely, who paid attention to the small things that mattered to her. Isabella's homework proved to be advanced mathematics and a history report about Renaissance Italy, both of which she tackled with Sophia's help at the dining room table, while Dante worked on his laptop nearby. Sophia found herself relaxing into the domestic routine, helping Isabella sound out difficult words and explaining mathematical concepts in ways that made the little girl's face light up with understanding. She was so absorbed in helping Isabella diagram a particularly complex sentence that she almost missed the change in Dante's posture when his phone rang. His voice, when he answered, was clipped and professional, but there was an underlying tension that made Sophia's attention sharpen despite herself. When, he said quietly, his eyes flicking toward Isabella and Sophia before he stepped into the adjoining office. How did she get jurisdiction? That was supposed to be impossible. Sophia couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see Dante through the glass office door, his face becoming increasingly grave as he listened. Whatever news he was receiving, it wasn't good. Is everything okay with Daddy? Isabella asked quietly, her homework forgotten as she watched her father's tense conversation. "I'm sure it's just business," Sophia replied, though something cold was settling in her stomach. Adult stuff is complicated sometimes. When Dante returned to the dining room 15 minutes later, his expression was carefully controlled, but Sophia could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. He knelt beside Isabella's chair, his voice gentle despite whatever turmoil he was managing. "Piccola," he said softly, "I need to talk to Sophia about some grown-up things. Why don't you go choose a movie for us to watch later?" Isabella nodded solemnly and headed toward the living room, but not before hugging Sophia tightly around the waist. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. "You make everything feel better." After Isabella was out of earshot, Dante's demeanor shifted completely. His voice, when he spoke, carried an edge that made Sophia understand why men in expensive suits answered his phone calls immediately. "There's been a development," he said simply. "Isabella's mother is challenging our custody arrangement. She's claiming that my lifestyle isn't appropriate for raising a child." Sophia felt her stomach drop. "What does that mean?" "It means Maria wants Isabella back, and she's found a lawyer who thinks he can convince a judge that she's the more stable parent." Dante's laugh held no humor whatsoever, the irony being that Maria's idea of stability involves her boyfriend Carlos, who has a documented history of violence and drug trafficking. The way he said Carlos's name, with a kind of controlled disgust, made Sophia realize that this custody battle involved complications she couldn't begin to understand. But she could see the fear beneath Dante's anger, the terror of a father facing the possibility of losing his child. "What can you do?" she asked quietly. "Whatever it takes," Dante replied, and something in his tone made her believe him completely. "But in the meantime, Isabella needs consistency, stability, people she trusts around her. This process could take months, and I won't have her feeling insecure." "You want me to stay?" Sophia said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I'm offering you the guest room, full-time compensation, and the security of knowing that Isabella will have someone who genuinely cares about her well-being during this situation." Dante's green-gold eyes were completely serious. "I realize it's a significant commitment and you have every right to refuse, but—" "Yes," Sophia said without hesitation. The speed of her own response surprised her, but looking toward the living room where Isabella was humming softly to herself while sorting through DVDs, she realized the decision wasn't difficult at all. "Yes, I'll stay." Dante's relief was immediate and unmistakable. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea what this means to us." But as Sophia looked around the penthouse, noting the subtle security features she was only now beginning to recognize, the cameras and reinforced windows and the way Dante's driver had remained downstairs rather than leaving, she was beginning to suspect that she was agreeing to more than simple childcare. Whatever world Dante Torino inhabited, it was one where custody battles involved lawyers who specialized in making dangerous men look unfit, and where 80-year-old girls needed protection that went beyond the ordinary. She was stepping into something that could change her life completely, but watching Isabella's face light up when she announced that Sophia would be staying with them, she knew she'd made the right choice. Some children were worth protecting, regardless of the complications that protection might bring. A week into her new routine, Sophia woke to the sound of quiet movement in the kitchen and the scent of coffee brewing. The guest room had become her sanctuary, spacious and elegant with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Central Park. She'd never lived anywhere that felt so safe, so removed from the financial anxiety that had characterized most of her adult life. She found Dante at the stove, still in his workout clothes, his dark hair damp with sweat and his t-shirt clinging to shoulders that were broader than his perfectly tailored suits suggested. He was whisking eggs with the kind of focused concentration she'd learned he brought to everything, from reviewing Isabella's homework to the mysterious phone calls that sometimes pulled him away to his home office. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up with a smile that had become easier, more natural over the past week. The careful politeness of their first interactions had given way to something that felt dangerously close to domestic intimacy. "Good morning, Sophia. I was hoping you'd be up early. Isabella has been asking for pancakes, and I thought you might want to help me attempt them." "You don't know how to make pancakes?" she asked, moving to the coffee maker and pouring herself a cup from the carafe he'd already prepared. The simple consideration, the way he'd learned how she liked her mornings, made something warm unfurl in her chest. "I can manage most things," Dante replied, his slight accent making the words sound more intimate than they probably were. "But Isabella has very specific expectations about pancake quality, and I have a feeling yours would exceed mine." Working beside him in the kitchen felt natural in a way that should have worried her. He moved with quiet efficiency, anticipating what she needed and handing her ingredients before she asked for them. When she reached across him for the vanilla extract, her arm brushed his chest, and she felt him go still for a moment before stepping back to give her more room. The awareness between them had been building all week, small moments of contact that lingered longer than necessary, conversations that carried subtext she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. But this morning, with the early sunlight streaming through the windows and the intimate quiet of the kitchen around them, it felt impossible to ignore. Isabella appeared in the doorway as they were flipping the second batch of pancakes, her hair still messy from sleep and her princess pajamas wrinkled. She assessed the scene with the sharp intelligence she'd inherited from her father, and Sophia could see the moment when the little girl recognized something significant about finding the two adults cooking together. "Are you making breakfast together?" Isabella asked, her voice carrying a hopeful note that made Sophia's heart squeeze. "Sophia is teaching me your pancake standards," Dante replied, lifting Isabella onto the counter beside him so she could supervise their work. "Apparently, mine have been inadequate." "They're not inadequate," Isabella said loyally, then looked at Sophia conspiratorially. "But Sophia's are probably better." The three of them ate breakfast together at the dining table, Isabella chattering about her upcoming school project on immigration, while Dante listened with the kind of complete attention that made his daughter glow with importance. Sophia found herself watching the interaction with something that felt dangerously close to longing. She'd never experienced this kind of family dynamic, the easy affection and genuine interest that flowed between father and daughter. After they'd walked Isabella to school, Dante surprised Sophia by suggesting they take a longer route back through Central Park. The October morning was crisp and clear, the trees just beginning to turn, and for the first time since she'd moved into the penthouse, they were alone together without the buffer of Isabella's presence or household routine. "You've been good for her," Dante said as they walked along one of the quieter paths. "I haven't seen Isabella this settled in months." "She's been good for me too," Sophia replied honestly. "I never realized how much I missed having family around until I started living with you both." Something in her tone made him slow his pace, his attention focusing on her with the intensity she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. "You didn't have family growing up?" Sophia felt the familiar reluctance to share her past, but something about the morning, about the way he'd asked without prying, made her want to be honest. "I grew up in foster care," she said quietly, "from the time I was 5 until I aged out at 18. Some homes were better than others, but none of them were really family." Dante stopped walking entirely, turning to face her with an expression that held both understanding and something that looked like anger on her behalf. "What happened to your parents?" "Car accident," Sophia said simply. "No relatives who wanted to take on a traumatized 5-year-old, so I became a ward of the state. It's not a tragic story, really. I learned to take care of myself, got scholarships for college, made my own way. But you never learned what it felt like to be someone's priority," Dante said, and the accuracy of his observation made her breath catch. "Not until now," she admitted, then immediately felt exposed by the confession. The way he was looking at her, with something intense and protective in his green-gold eyes, made her feel like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "Sophia," he said quietly, stepping closer to her on the path. "What you did for Isabella that first day, protecting her when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose, that came from understanding what it feels like to need someone to fight for you." She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the way his eyes had darkened with emotion, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with possibility. This was dangerous territory, she realized, the kind of emotional intimacy that could change everything between them. "I should tell you about Maria," Dante said suddenly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested this wasn't a conversation he had easily. about why this custody situation is so complicated. They found a bench overlooking the reservoir, and Dante was quiet for a long moment before he began speaking. His voice, when he finally started, was carefully controlled, but she could hear the pain underneath. Maria and I were married for 3 years, he said. She was beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. On paper, we were perfect for each other. But Maria had demons I didn't recognize until it was too late. He paused, his hands clenched in his lap as he struggled with whatever memories he was revisiting. She started using cocaine socially at parties, events. I thought it was just the lifestyle, the pressure of being married to someone in my position. But it escalated quickly. What position? Sophia asked quietly, beginning to understand that there were layers to Dante's life she hadn't been told about. My family has business interests that some people find morally questionable, Dante replied carefully. We've been in New York for 4 generations, building legitimate enterprises, but our reputation precedes us. Maria found that world exciting until she found it overwhelming. The way he phrased it, the careful neutrality of his tone, made Sophia realize he was telling her something important without saying it directly. She thought about the security measures around Isabella's school, the driver who never left them unattended, the way certain phone calls made Dante's entire demeanor shift. After Isabella was born, I thought Maria would find stability in motherhood, Dante continued. Instead, her drug use intensified. She began leaving Isabella with nannies for days at a time, disappearing with friends who cared more about parties than responsibilities. When Isabella was 6, I found Maria unconscious from an overdose, while our daughter was alone in the apartment, hungry and scared. Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's when you divorced her? That's when I filed for full custody and made sure she got treatment, Dante said. Maria spent 6 months in rehabilitation, and I hoped she would emerge ready to be Isabella's mother again. Instead, she moved in with Carlos Mendoza, a man whose idea of supporting her sobriety involves supplying her with different drugs and using her connection to my family for his own purposes. The anger in his voice when he mentioned Carlos's name was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Sophia was beginning to understand that this custody battle wasn't just about parental rights. It was about keeping Isabella away from a dangerous situation that could destroy her. Carlos wants money, Dante said bluntly. He sees Isabella as leverage to get it, and Maria is too dependent on him to recognize that she's putting our daughter at risk. The lawyer they've hired specializes in making men like me look dangerous while making addicts look rehabilitated. Men like you? Sophia asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew what he meant. Men whose families have been involved in organized business for generations, Dante replied, his eyes meeting hers directly. Men who sometimes have to make difficult choices to protect the people they love. The words hung between them, and Sophia felt the final piece of understanding click into place. Dante Torino wasn't just wealthy, wasn't just powerful in the traditional sense. He was connected to something that most people only knew from movies, a world where violence was sometimes necessary and loyalty was everything. She should have been terrified, should have been planning her exit strategy, but instead she found herself thinking about the way he shaped eggs into hearts for his daughter, the way he listened to Isabella's school stories with complete attention, the way he'd thanked her for protecting a child he loved more than his own life. Does that frighten you? Dante asked quietly, watching her face for signs of judgment or fear. It should, Sophia replied honestly. But what frightens me more is the thought of Isabella being anywhere near Carlos. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. You understand, he said quietly. I understand that you're a good father who would do anything to keep his daughter safe, Sophia replied. Everything else is just context. The distance between them on the bench seemed to disappear without either of them moving. Dante's hand was resting on the back of the bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm near her shoulders. When she turned to face him more directly, their knees brushed, and neither of them pulled away. Sophia, he said, his voice rougher than usual. This situation with Maria and Carlos, it's going to get worse before it gets better. If you want to leave, I understand. I can make sure you're compensated for... I'm not leaving, she interrupted, the words coming out more forcefully than she'd intended. Isabella needs stability right now, and she trusts me. I'm not going to abandon her. What about what you need? Dante asked, his green-gold eyes searching her face. This isn't the life you chose. Before she could answer, his phone rang with the sharp insistence that indicated an emergency call. Dante's expression hardened as he checked the caller ID, and Sophia could see the shift from the man who'd been sharing his vulnerabilities to the man who handled dangerous situations. What happened? He answered without preamble, his voice immediately cold and focused. Sophia couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see Dante's face growing increasingly grim as he listened. His free hand clenched into a fist, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a threat that made her shiver despite the warm morning. Where is she now? Good. Double the security detail and make sure Carlos knows he's been identified. If he comes within a mile of that school again, we handle it permanently. He ended the call and immediately speed-dialed another number, his movements sharp with controlled fury. Marco, he said when the call connected. Carlos just tried to approach Isabella at school. He claimed to be picking her up for Maria. The security team stopped him, but this escalates things. We need to move to code red protocols immediately. Sophia felt her blood run cold. Someone had tried to take Isabella, had gotten close enough to her school that only the security measures Dante had put in place had prevented it. Is she safe? Sophia asked as soon as Dante ended the second call. She's safe, Dante replied grimly. The security team has her in lockdown at the school, and we're picking her up now. But this changes everything. They rushed back to the penthouse in tense silence, Dante making a series of calls that involved words like surveillance and containment and elimination of threats. Sophia found herself gripping the car door handle, her mind racing with images of what could have happened if the security hadn't been in place. That evening, after Isabella had been safely retrieved from school and was occupied with homework that neither adult could focus on properly, Sophia found Dante on the penthouse terrace, staring out at the city lights with an expression that suggested he was planning something that would solve the Carlos problem permanently. She's going to be okay, Sophia said quietly, joining him at the railing. This time Dante replied, but Carlos is escalating, and Maria is too far gone to recognize that she's being used. I can't protect Isabella and fight a custody battle at the same time. What are you thinking about doing? Sophia asked, though something in his posture suggested she didn't want to know the answer. Whatever it takes, Dante said simply, turning to face her. His eyes were dark with something that was both protective and dangerous. I won't let them take her. The intensity in his voice, the absolute certainty of his commitment, should have terrified her. Instead, it made her step closer to him, drawn by the recognition that this man would sacrifice anything to keep his daughter safe. Sophia, he said quietly, his hand coming up to touch her cheek. You should know that staying with us means staying in my world completely. There are no half measures when it comes to protecting the people I care about. The way he said people I care about, the way his thumb brushed across her cheekbone, made her breath catch. They were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, could feel the tension radiating from his body. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered, and saw something flare in his expression that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with want. He leaned closer, his other hand settling at her waist, and she could feel her heart racing as the space between them disappeared. This was crossing a line, moving from employer and employee to something that could complicate everything. But she couldn't bring herself to step away. The moment before their lips met, Dante's phone rang again. He closed his eyes briefly, his forehead touching hers, before he answered with barely controlled irritation. This had better be an emergency, he said into the phone. Whatever the caller told him made his expression go completely cold. When he hung up, he looked at Sophia with something that might have been regret. Carlos just made threats against everyone in this building, Dante said quietly. He knows you're here, knows you're important to Isabella. As of tonight, you're not just helping with childcare. You're under my protection whether you want to be or not. Standing on the terrace with the city spread out below them and the promise of violence hanging in the air between them, Sophia realized that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to understand. But looking at this man who would wage war to keep his daughter safe, she knew she'd made her choice the moment she'd decided to protect Isabella in that restaurant. Some children were worth fighting for, and some men were worth standing beside when the fight came. Sophia knew something was wrong the moment they returned to the penthouse. The doorman's face was too carefully neutral, and the way Dante's driver had insisted on escorting them all the way to the private elevator spoke of precautions that hadn't been necessary that morning. But it was the sight of two men in expensive suits waiting in the foyer, both wearing the kind of alertness that suggested they were armed, that made her stomach drop. Dante's expression shifted immediately into something cold and dangerous as he assessed the scene. His hand moved to the small of Sophia's back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive, while Isabella pressed closer to both of them with the instinctive awareness children had for adult tension. "Uncle Marco," Isabella said with relief, recognizing one of the men. "Did you come to visit?" "Something like that, Piccola," the man replied, his voice gentle with Isabella despite the hardness in his dark eyes. "Why don't you go get your art supplies and show me what you've been working on in school?" Isabella looked between the adults, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand, but obediently headed toward her room. Sophia watched her go with a growing sense of dread, knowing that whatever had brought Dante's associates to the apartment wasn't going to be good news. "Report," Dante said simply once Isabella was out of earshot. Marco, a man in his late 20s with the kind of lean build and watchful eyes that suggested he was very good at violence, stepped forward. Carlos and two of his associates broke in around noon. They didn't take anything, but they left messages. Specific ones. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Show me." They moved through the penthouse systematically, and Sophia felt her blood chill as she saw the evidence of violation. Someone had been in the kitchen where she'd made breakfast with Dante that morning, had stood in the hallway where Isabella's school pictures hung, had invaded the sanctuary that had begun to feel like home. In Isabella's room, the message was written in red marker on her princess mirror. "She's not safe anywhere." In the master bedroom, similar words were scrawled on the bathroom mirror. "Neither is your whore." Sophia flinched at the crude word, but it was Dante's reaction that truly frightened her. She could see him struggling to contain a rage so profound it made the air around him seem to vibrate with threat. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly controlled, but she could hear the promise of violence underneath. "How did they get past building security?" he asked. "They had a key," Marco replied grimly. "And the security codes. Someone with access gave them entry." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through implications that Sophia couldn't begin to understand. Then he turned to her with an expression that held both apology and determination. "Sophia, we need to talk," he said quietly, "about who I really am and what that means for your safety." They sent Isabella to the playroom with strict instructions not to leave it, and Sophia found herself sitting across from Dante in his home office while Marco and his partner positioned themselves where they could monitor both the building's entrances and Isabella's location. The casual efficiency with which they arranged security told her more about Dante's world than any explanation could have. "You have questions," Dante said simply. "Ask them." Sophia looked around the office, noting details she'd overlooked before. The safe built into the wall behind his desk, the second phone line that never rang when she was present, the way his computer screen automatically locked whenever anyone else entered the room. This wasn't just a successful businessman's workspace, this was a command center. "You're not just connected to organized crime," she said quietly. "You run it." Dante nodded once, his green-gold eyes never leaving her face. "My family has been part of what people call the Mafia for 4 generations. My great-grandfather came from Sicily in 1924 and established our presence in New York. My grandfather and father built legitimate businesses alongside our traditional activities. When my father died 3 years ago, I inherited both the legal enterprises and the leadership of the Torino crime family." The clinical way he stated it, without pride or apology, made the information somehow easier to process. This wasn't a confession extracted under pressure. This was a man sharing the truth about his life with someone he trusted to handle it responsibly. "What does that mean, exactly?" Sophia asked. What do you do? We own restaurants, construction companies, several import businesses, all completely legitimate, Dante replied. We also provide protection services to businesses in certain neighborhoods, manage loan arrangements for people who can't access traditional banking, and ensure that certain types of crime don't happen in areas under our influence. The euphemistic language didn't hide what he was really telling her, but it also didn't sensationalize it. This wasn't the glamorized violence of movies. This was a business structure that operated by different rules than the legitimate world. Are you a violent man? Sophia asked directly, needing to know. When violence is necessary to protect my family or my people, yes, Dante replied without hesitation. I don't seek it, but I don't avoid it when the alternative is allowing harm to come to people I'm responsible for. People like Isabella, Sophia said. People like Isabella, Dante confirmed. And now people like you. The weight of that statement settled between them. Sophia was beginning to understand that accepting Dante's protection meant accepting his methods. And those methods sometimes involved solutions that law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't provide. Carlos knows this about you, she said. That's why he's escalating. Carlos thinks my position makes me vulnerable. Dante replied, something dangerous flickering in his expression. He believes that threatening a child and a woman under my protection will make me negotiate rather than simply eliminating the threat he represents. The casual way he mentioned elimination made Sophia shiver, but it was the protective fury in his voice that made her pulse quicken. This man would kill for his daughter, would wage war to keep her safe, and somehow that absolute commitment was more reassuring than terrifying. Isabella and I are leaving for the family compound upstate tonight, Dante continued. It's secure in ways this building can't be, and my mother and brothers can provide additional protection while I handle the Carlos situation permanently. What about me? Sophia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. You're coming with us, unless you've decided that this world is too dangerous for you, Dante said quietly. I would understand if you wanted me to arrange alternative protection while you relocate somewhere Carlos can't find you. The offer was genuine, she realized. Despite everything she now knew, despite the fact that her presence complicated his security arrangements, he was giving her a choice. I'm not leaving Isabella, Sophia said simply. Not now, not when she needs stability and protection. If going to your family compound keeps her safe, then that's where I belong. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. You understand what you're committing to? He asked quietly. This isn't just temporary protection. Once you're part of my family's security protocols, you become part of our world permanently. The way he said our world, the careful emphasis on the possessive pronoun, made her realize he was offering her more than just safety. He was offering her belonging, a place in the structure that meant everything to him. I understand, she replied, and saw something flare in his eyes that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with desire. They spent the afternoon packing, a domestic activity that felt surreal given the circumstances. Isabella was excited about visiting her grandmother's house, chattering about the horses and the big kitchen where Nana made fresh pasta. She seemed unaware that this wasn't a vacation but a strategic retreat to a fortress. Sophia was folding clothes in the guest room when Dante appeared in the doorway, watching her pack with an intensity that made her movements falter. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. I'm trying to understand how I got this fortunate, he said quietly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. A week ago, you were a stranger who protected my daughter. Now you're choosing to enter a world that most people would run from, staying with us when you could have any life you wanted. Maybe this is the life I want, Sophia replied, setting down the sweater she'd been folding to face him directly. Maybe I've been waiting my whole life for people who were worth protecting. The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. Dante's eyes had darkened with something intense and hungry, and she could feel the attraction that had been building all week finally demanding acknowledgement. Sophia, he said, his voice rougher than usual. If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. You won't just be Isabella's caretaker or someone under my protection. You'll be mine. The possessive claim in his voice should have triggered every independent instinct she'd developed during years of taking care of herself. Instead, It made something warm and desperate unfurl in her chest. She'd spent her entire adult life belonging to no one, connected to nothing, responsible only for her own survival. The idea of being claimed by this man, of being important enough to someone that they would fight wars to keep her safe, was intoxicating in a way she'd never experienced. "Maybe I want to be yours," she whispered, stepping closer to him until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Dante's control finally snapped. His hands came up to cup her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones as he searched her eyes for any sign of doubt or fear. Finding none, he leaned down and kissed her with a desperation that spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt as he backed her against the wall. This wasn't the gentle exploration she'd imagined their first kiss would be. This was passion born from danger and the knowledge that they might not have unlimited time to express what was growing between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Once I touch you, really touch you, I won't be able to let you go." "I don't want you to let me go," Sophia replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I want to be yours, Dante, completely." He lifted her easily, carrying her to his bedroom while she wrapped her legs around his waist and kissed her way along his neck. She could taste the salt on his skin, could feel the way his breathing hitched when she found the sensitive spot just below his ear. He set her down beside his bed, his hands gentle now as he began unbuttoning her shirt with reverent slowness. Each newly exposed inch of skin received his focused attention, kisses and caresses that made her understand this wasn't just physical desire but emotional claiming. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her collarbone. "So perfect, so brave. I don't deserve you." She captured his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You protected me before you even knew me," she said fiercely. "You've given me a family, a purpose, a place to belong. Don't tell me you don't deserve this when you've given me everything I never knew I needed." The vulnerability in his expression as he processed her words made her chest tight with emotion. This powerful man, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, needed to be told he was worthy of love just as much as she did. Their lovemaking was careful and intense, Dante taking his time to worship every inch of her skin, while she learned the ways to make him lose the control he maintained so carefully in every other aspect of his life. He checked in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted everything he was giving her. The consideration he showed her, the way he prioritized her pleasure over his own urgency, made her understand that this was how he loved, completely and without reservation. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Sophia's head on his chest while his fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows, and she could hear Isabella's voice in the distance as she played with her toys, oblivious to the way her father's world had just shifted on its axis. "I love you," Dante said quietly, the words so soft she almost missed them. "I know it's too soon, too complicated, but I need you to know that this isn't just about protection or convenience. What I feel for you, it's everything." "I love you too," Sophia replied, surprised by how easily the words came. "I think I've loved you since I watched you hold Isabella that first night, since I saw the kind of father you are." They might have stayed there longer, might have spent the evening exploring this new dimension of their relationship, but Dante's phone rang with the urgent tone that indicated family business. He answered it reluctantly, his arms still around Sophia as he listened to whatever report Marco was giving him. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "Maria is here," he said simply, "downstairs with Carlos and a custody enforcement officer. They have a court order demanding immediate visitation with Isabella." Sophia felt ice settle in her stomach. "Can they take her?" "Not from this building, not with my security in place," Dante replied, already reaching for his clothes. "But this forces our timeline. We leave for the compound tonight, and I deal with Maria and Carlos permanently." As they dressed quickly and efficiently, Sophia could hear the shift in Dante's demeanor from lover back to leader. The tenderness they'd shared was still there, but it was now wrapped in steel determination and the kind of protective fury that would reshape the world to keep his family safe. standing in his bedroom, watching him prepare for a confrontation that could determine Isabella's entire future. Sophia realized that her choice to stay, to love him, to enter his world completely, was about to be tested in ways she couldn't have imagined. But looking at this man who just made love to her like she was precious beyond measure, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The Torino family compound sprawled across 50 acres of upstate New York countryside, hidden behind gates that looked decorative but were reinforced with steel and monitored by cameras that tracked every movement within a mile radius. Sophia had expected something imposing, but she hadn't been prepared for the warmth of the main house, with its stone fireplace and family photographs spanning for generations. Dante's mother, Elena Torino, was a small, elegant woman in her late 60s who assessed Sophia with sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing. She embraced her son with fierce affection, then turned that calculating gaze on the woman who'd arrived under her protection. "So you're the one who defended our Isabella," Elena said, her slight accent more pronounced than her son's. "Dante tells me you risked everything for a child you'd never met." "Any decent person would have done the same," Sophia replied, immediately sensing that this woman valued honesty over flattery. "Any decent person would have looked away and protected themselves," Elena corrected with a slight smile. "My son has excellent judgment about character. Welcome to our family." The acceptance felt significant, like a blessing that carried weight in this world where family loyalty meant survival. Dante's brothers, Marco and Luca, were equally welcoming, though she could see them cataloging her potential as both asset and liability in the battles to come. Isabella adapted to the compound immediately, racing through the gardens with the security of a child who knew every hiding place and secret passage. She showed Sophia the horses, the greenhouse where her grandmother grew herbs, and the kitchen where 3 generations of family recipes were still prepared daily. That evening, as they prepared for Isabella's bedtime routine in unfamiliar surroundings, Dante pulled Sophia aside with news that made her stomach clench with dread. "The custody hearing has been moved up to tomorrow," he said quietly. "Maria's lawyer is claiming that my criminal associations make me an unfit parent, and the judge wants immediate testimony from all parties involved. What does that mean for us?" Sophia asked, though she suspected she already knew. "It means you'll be testifying about what you witnessed regarding Maria's neglect and Carlos's threats," Dante replied. "Your perspective as an outside observer could be crucial in demonstrating the danger they represent to Isabella." The next morning, they dressed carefully for court, Sophia in a conservative navy suit that Elena had insisted she borrow, Dante in charcoal gray that emphasized his legitimate businessman persona rather than his role as a crime family leader. Isabella stayed at the compound with her grandmother and uncles, blissfully unaware that her entire future was being decided in a Manhattan courtroom. The hearing was a nightmare of legal maneuvering and character assassination. Maria's lawyer painted Dante as a dangerous criminal whose lifestyle endangered his daughter, while conveniently ignoring Maria's drug history and Carlos's violent background. When Sophia took the stand, she testified with clear precision about finding Isabella alone and scared, about Carlos's attempt to kidnap her from school, about the threatening messages left in their home. But it was Maria's appearance that truly shook her. Dante's ex-wife was beautiful in a brittle way, clearly sober but equally clearly under enormous stress. When she testified about wanting to rebuild her relationship with Isabella, Sophia could hear genuine love mixed with desperation, and she realized this custody battle wasn't about a woman who didn't care about her child. It was about a woman who'd been manipulated into believing she could have her daughter and keep her dangerous boyfriend. During a recess, Sophia overheard Carlos on his phone in the hallway, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty that made her blood run cold. "The kid's just leverage," he was saying. "Once we get custody, we can negotiate with Torino from a position of strength. He'll pay anything to get her back." She'd immediately found Dante and repeated what she'd heard, watching his face go completely expressionless in the way that meant he was planning something violent and final. But the legal system moved slowly, and they left the courthouse that afternoon with no resolution, only a promise that the judge would render his decision within 48 hours. They were halfway back to the compound when Dante's phone rang with the call that changed everything. "What do you mean she's gone?" Dante's voice was deadly quiet, But Sophia could see his hands tightening on the phone until his knuckles were white. She could hear Marco's voice on the other end, tense with fury and self-recrimination. Carlos had somehow bypassed their security at Isabella's school, posing as an authorized pickup with forged documentation. By the time the security team realized the deception, Isabella was gone. Dante's transformation was immediate and terrifying. The man who made love to her with gentle reverence, who shaped eggs into hearts for his daughter's breakfast, disappeared completely. In his place was someone who could order deaths with the same tone most people used to order coffee. Track every vehicle Carlos has access to, he commanded into his phone. Pull all traffic cameras within a 50-mile radius. Contact our people in the police department and make sure they understand this is a family matter that requires immediate attention. And get me locations on every property Carlos or his associates have used in the past 6 months. Sophia felt helpless terror wash over her as the reality sank in. Someone had taken Isabella, had stolen the little girl who called her Sophia with such trust and joy. The child who'd shown her what it felt like to be needed, to be part of a family, was somewhere scared and alone with a man who saw her only as a bargaining chip. "I'm coming with you," she said when Dante began coordinating the search and rescue operation. "Absolutely not," Dante replied without hesitation. "This will be dangerous, and I can't protect you and find Isabella simultaneously." "She's my family too," Sophia said fiercely. "I'm not sitting here safely while she's terrified and alone. Either I come with you or I find my own way to help, but I'm not staying behind." The argument that followed was brief and intense, ending only when Marco called with Carlos's location. He was holding Isabella in a warehouse in Queens, demanding $10 million and safe passage out of the country in exchange for her return. The deadline was 6 hours, after which he promised the little girl would disappear permanently. The drive to Queens was silent except for the constant stream of tactical communication as Dante's men surrounded the warehouse and assessed the situation. Sophia sat in the passenger seat of Dante's car, her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms, trying not to think about how frightened Isabella must be. When they arrived at the command location 3 blocks from the warehouse, Sophia could see the military-like precision with which Dante's organization operated. Men with military backgrounds and expensive equipment, all focused on a single objective: retrieving one 80-year-old girl alive and unharmed. Carlos's mistake had been underestimating how quickly Dante could mobilize his resources. His second mistake had been choosing a location that Dante's family had used for storage in the past, meaning they had architectural plans and knew every entrance and exit. The assault was swift and surgical. While Dante's men created diversions at the main entrances, a smaller team entered through a skylight that Carlos hadn't bothered to secure. Sophia watched from the command vehicle, listening to radio chatter that confirmed Isabella was alive but clearly terrified. That's when everything went wrong. Carlos, realizing he was surrounded and outgunned, grabbed Isabella and pressed a knife to her throat while demanding to speak directly to Dante. The warehouse had been wired with explosives, he claimed, and any attempt to take him down would result in everyone inside being killed. Sophia watched Dante's face as he received this information, saw the moment when a father's desperation warred with a leader's training. He was going to trade himself for Isabella. She realized, was going to walk into that warehouse and accept whatever terms Carlos demanded because the alternative was risking his daughter's life. Without allowing herself to think about the consequences, Sophia grabbed one of the communications headsets and spoke directly to Carlos through the tactical team's radio frequency. "Carlos, this is Sophia," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The woman from the restaurant who's been taking care of Isabella. I want to talk to you." The radio crackled for a moment before Carlos's voice came through, suspicious and angry. "What the hell do you want?" "I want to make a deal," Sophia replied, ignoring Dante's furious attempts to take the headset from her. "You don't want Dante or his money, you want leverage over him. I'll trade places with Isabella." A grown woman who chose to be involved in this instead of a child who never had a choice. She could see Dante's face cycling through rage and terror as he realized what she was proposing, but she kept talking before he could stop her. "I'm the one Dante cares about now," she continued, the lie coming easily because it served her purpose. I'm the one sharing his bed and his future plans. Isabella is just his daughter, but I'm his woman. If you want real leverage, you want me. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then Carlos's voice came back, thoughtful and cruel. You trade your life for some brat who isn't even yours? She's mine in every way that matters, Sophia replied fiercely. And if you hurt her, Dante will hunt you to the ends of the earth. But if you let her go and take me instead, you have someone he'll actually negotiate to get back. 20 minutes later, Sophia walked through the warehouse door alone and unarmed, every step taking her further from safety and closer to a man who'd already proven he was willing to hurt children. But when she saw Isabella, huddled in a corner with tears streaking her face, every risk felt worthwhile. The exchange happened quickly. Carlos released Isabella, who ran straight to Sophia's arms, and in that moment when his attention was focused on securing his new hostage, Dante's sniper took the shot that ended Carlos's threats permanently. In the aftermath, as federal agents swarmed the warehouse and paramedics checked Isabella for injuries, Sophia found herself sitting on the back of an ambulance with a shock blanket around her shoulders, trying to process what had just happened. Dante appeared beside her, his face still pale with the terror of nearly losing both his daughter and the woman he loved in the same day. His hands were shaking as he cupped her face, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't ever do anything like that again," he said fiercely. "I can't lose you, Sophia. I can't survive losing you." "I couldn't let him hurt her," Sophia replied simply. "She's ours, Dante. She's our daughter in every way that matters, and I'd do it again to keep her safe." Looking into his eyes, seeing the depth of love and gratitude and terror there, Sophia realized that her commitment to this family had been tested in the most extreme way possible and had emerged stronger. She wasn't just staying because Isabella needed her anymore, wasn't just accepting Dante's protection because she had nowhere else to go. She was home with the people who were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. And from the way Dante was holding her, like she was the most precious thing in his world, she knew he understood that she was his completely, just as he was hers. 2 weeks after Carlos's death, Sophia stood in the judge's chambers watching Dante sign the final custody documents that made Isabella legally and permanently his daughter. Maria had voluntarily relinquished her parental rights in exchange for entering a rehabilitation program far from New York, finally understanding that her addiction and poor choices had nearly cost her daughter's life. The judge, an older woman who'd clearly seen too many custody battles end badly, looked at Isabella with something like relief. "This little girl will have the stability and protection she needs," she said to Dante. "See that she never doubts how much she's loved." "Never," Dante replied with the kind of absolute certainty that made promises feel like sacred vows. Outside the courthouse, Isabella skipped between Sophia and Dante, holding both their hands as they walked toward the car. She was chattering about her upcoming science project, oblivious to the legal significance of what had just transpired, secure in the knowledge that the adults she trusted had handled everything. That evening, back at the compound where they decided to stay while the Manhattan penthouse was being renovated with upgraded security, Sophia found herself on the terrace overlooking the gardens where Isabella was playing with the puppies Dante's mother kept. The October air was crisp and clear, the leaves turning brilliant colors that made the entire landscape look like something from a fairy tale. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Dante approach until his arms came around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. His warmth was immediate and comforting, and she relaxed into his embrace with the kind of complete trust she'd never experienced before. "You're quiet tonight," he murmured into her hair. "What's on your mind?" "Just thinking about how much has changed," Sophia replied, covering his hands with hers where they rested on her waist. 3 weeks ago I was a waitress with no family, no real future, no idea what I was capable of. Now I'm here with you and Isabella, and it feels like the life I was always supposed to have but never dared to hope for. You saved us," Dante said quietly, "not just from Carlos but from being incomplete. Isabella needed a mother who would love her unconditionally, and I needed someone who could see past my world to who I really am underneath it all." Sophia turned in his arms to face him, studying the face that had become more precious to her than her own safety. The dangerous edge was still there, would always be part of who he was. But when he looked at her, she saw only tenderness and love so profound it took her breath away. "I have something to ask you," Dante said, his voice carrying a nervousness that was completely at odds with the confident man who commanded respect from dangerous people across the city. Before she could respond, he was dropping to one knee, pulling out a ring box that held a diamond so beautiful it caught the setting sun and threw rainbows across the terrace. The ring was classic and elegant, the kind of heirloom piece that would be passed down through generations. "Sophia Reeves," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you've given me everything I never knew I was missing. You've made Isabella feel safe and loved. You've made our house a home, and you've made me a better man. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Isabella's mother, and the heart of this family officially and forever?" Through the window, she could see Isabella pressed against the glass, her face glowing with excitement as she watched the proposal she'd clearly been expecting and hoping for. Elena was beside her granddaughter, both of them holding their breath as they waited for Sophia's answer. "Yes," Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her face as Dante slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, of course, yes. I want to be yours forever." Isabella burst through the French doors before the words were fully out of her mouth, launching herself into both their arms with squeals of pure joy. "I knew it," she announced triumphantly. "I told Nana you were going to ask her, and I told her Sophia would say yes because she loves us as much as we love her." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the compound's garden, surrounded by 4 generations of Torino family and the few friends from Sophia's previous life who could be trusted with the truth about Dante's world. Isabella served as both flower girl and ring bearer, wearing a dress that matched Sophia's in pale gold silk, her face glowing with the satisfaction of seeing her plan for her father's happiness come to fruition. Dante's vows, spoken in front of his family and the priest who'd baptized him as a child, were simple and profound. "You came into our lives as a protector and became our salvation," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. "I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you for all the days of my life, and to never let you doubt how precious you are to us." Sophia's vows were equally heartfelt. "You taught me what family really means," she replied, looking into the green-gold eyes that had become her anchor. "You and Isabella showed me that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to love you unconditionally. I promise to stand beside you, to protect what we've built together, and to love our daughter as fiercely as you do." When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Isabella cheered so loudly that the entire gathering burst into laughter. The celebration that followed was intimate and joyous, filled with the kind of genuine happiness that came from people who'd fought for their right to be together and emerged victorious. Take a moment and think about this story we've shared together. What would you do to protect the people you love? How far would you go to defend a family that chose you just as much as you chose them? Sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't about finding your soulmate. They're about finding your purpose through protecting someone else's happiness. 6 months later, Sophia woke to the sound of Isabella's laughter echoing from the kitchen and the scent of pancakes that meant Dante was attempting to recreate their first domestic morning together. Her hand moved instinctively to her growing belly, where their second child was making its presence known with increasingly active movements. She found her husband and daughter working together at the stove, Isabella standing on a step stool so she could help flip pancakes while Dante supervised with the patient attention he brought to everything involving his children. They were discussing baby names with the kind of serious consideration that 80-year-olds brought to important decisions. "I still think if it's a boy, we should name him Carlos," Isabella was saying, completely unaware of the way the name made both adults freeze momentarily. "But the good Carlos, like Carlos from my book about the brave knight, not the bad Carlos who tried to hurt us." Dante caught Sophia's eye across the kitchen, and she could see the mixture of amusement and protectiveness in his expression. "That's a beautiful name, Piccola," he said carefully. "But maybe we should think of names that don't have any bad memories attached to them." "What about Antonio?" Isabella suggested immediately. "Like Nana's father in the old pictures. Or maybe Victoria if it's a girl, because Sophia is victorious like a warrior princess." The conversation continued over breakfast, with Isabella offering increasingly creative suggestions while Sophia and Dante exchanged the kind of looks that spoke of shared amusement and complete contentment. This was the life they'd built together, the safety they'd fought for, the family they'd chosen and protected and nurtured into something beautiful. Later that evening, after Isabella had been tucked into bed with stories about brave princesses and protective knights, Sophia and Dante sat together in the living room of their renovated Manhattan penthouse, her head on his shoulder while he read through business reports, and she worked on sketches for the art studio he was having built for her in the compound. "I never imagined this," she said quietly, her hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "When I was growing up, moving between foster homes and never really belonging anywhere, I used to dream about having a family. But even in my wildest dreams, I never imagined anything this perfect." "It's perfect because we built it together," Dante replied, setting aside his papers to focus entirely on her. "Because we chose each other and fought for each other and refused to let anything destroy what we knew was right." Outside their windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, but inside their home, everything was warm and safe and complete. Isabella was sleeping peacefully in her room, dreaming whatever dreams 80-year-olds had when they felt completely secure in their parents' love. The baby kicked gently against Sophia's ribs, already responding to the sound of its father's voice. And Dante held them both, his family, the people who'd given his life meaning beyond power or wealth or respect. Sometimes the best families aren't born. They're made by people who recognize what's worth protecting and refuse to let it go. Sometimes love isn't about finding someone who completes you, it's about finding someone whose happiness becomes more important than your own safety. And sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just the beginning of something even better, built on the foundation of people who chose to fight for each other when the world tried to tear them apart. In her dreams that night, Sophia was back in that restaurant, watching a scared little girl ask for help and making the choice that would change everything. But now she knew how the story ended, with three people who belonged together completely, safe in the love they'd built and the future they'd fight to protect, no matter what challenges might come.